Hey guys, Kevin here. Big Blue State of Mind, episode 1 about to get underway. Before that, just want to take a second to thank Nick Lee for helping us get off the ground with this thing. Please, if you're a fan of great craft beers, go check him out on his podcast, the Capital Brew Podcast. All right, so coming up, John, Eric, and I get into it about last season, this year's free agency signings, and next week's upcoming draft. If you like what you hear, please subscribe and give us a like on Facebook. All right, without further ado, welcome to the Big Blue State of Mind, a New York Giants podcast. 6 wins, 10 losses, an offense that only scored 17.5 points a game. The 2020 New York Giants had the second worst offense in the NFL. Only the New York Jets were worse in both points per game and total yardage. Defensively, however, there were a lot of things to be positive about and definitely worth noting. James Bradbury, Blake Martinez, and Leonard Williams led a defense that ended up ranked 9th in points allowed, which kept the G-men in most games last season. My name is Kevin, and I am a Giants fan. It has been 9 years and almost 3 months since our last playoff win, which, of course, was Super Bowl 46. With me today, John Palmieri. How are you, John?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing well. I'm ready to drink away the sorrows of 2020. I'm doing so with a Stone Cold Steve Austin Broken Skull IPA. What are you drinking?
So today I actually have a Mosaic Daydream from Other Half down in Brooklyn.
Other Half, very nice. I like that a lot. Also with me is my good friend Eric Mastrogiovanni. We are fresh off a nice Little League debut game today. Eric, what are you drinking today?
Today I have a beer from Thin Man Brewery in Buffalo. And as I was picking it out, I was actually thinking of Cowboy fans that were gambling on them winning Super Bowl this year. It's called Burning Money.
Burning Money, I like it.
So I was just thinking about those Cowboy fans out there putting their money on them to win the Super Bowl.
Yeah, right now they're a 28-1 shot. We're 66-1, so I think we might be pulling some money together and just.
It's all about value.
Yeah, there's definitely a value bet on the Giants if they have that win now mentality that we're seeing a lot of teams go with. So let's get this started. Really excited to get this show on the go here. We're all very passionate Giants fans, not happy with the 2020 season. I'm going to start with you, John. Just give me your thoughts on 2020. Any positives that come out of it? Anything that you can highlight?
Yeah, the positive. One of the positives for the year is I can now attribute my drinking problem to the Giants and not so much to being home for COVID. So that's good. So the Giants turn themselves around, and hopefully my beer intake will decrease a little bit. But on a serious note, there are some good takeaways from last year, in my opinion. They obviously started off really rough. I think they started out 0-5, ended up 7-1 or 1-7 at one point, and then we went on a nice 4-game winning streak. I feel like the offensive line was making strides under Mark Colombo. He obviously had some type of altercation with Coach Judge and was relieved of his duties during our bye week, I believe, in week 11, and then you saw things tail off a little. I think that you're going to see more growth out of the offensive line. I think it was a tough year. We'll get to Daniel Jones in a little bit, but for a young offensive line to gel and grow just wasn't happening with no preseason, no training camp. Just a really hard year to expect to see something out of a young offensive line. So hopefully that changes this year. You got some more time to grow. Obviously, a major setback was losing Saquon Barkley in week 2. So other positives that, they used some serviceable running backs, Wayne Gallman, Deion Lewis later in the year, Devontae Freeman. They were able to produce some on the ground. I think towards the end of the year they had some issues, but it was more an issue of having to pass the ball more because you were trailing by a decent amount in some of those games, especially the Arizona Cardinal game. But I think there are positives to take away. I think we will see growth this year, and as a Giant fan, we were a second half of an Eagles game away from being a playoff team. So,
how bad was that though? Having to beating the Cowboys at the end of the season and having a shot at the playoffs is always a good thing. But when you have to rely on the Philadelphia Eagles to help you get in the playoffs. I'm going to be honest with you. I didn't even watch the game. It was the night game. I went to sleep and I said I can't root for the Eagles. There's no way I can watch this game and root for it. So I'm gonna wake up and see what happens. And just I didn't realize. I'm glad I did because I probably would have broken my TV. Eric, anything you want to add?
No, just thinking back to last year, I think I was cautiously optimistic at the beginning of the season. I think we were looking for a rebound from Barkley from the previous season with, he had small injuries and the line wasn't very good. And having his injury so early in the season, I believe that really kind of took a lot of steam out of the engine. And a couple of the positive things are, I think the Slayton-Jones connection, continued to grow with the pieces that they're adding around them. Hopefully that continues to blossom and go that way. I think on the defensive side of the ball, the defensive backfield did a really good job kind of gelling throughout the season. The defensive line, particularly Leonard Williams, obviously stepped his game up to Pro Bowl level last year. So I think those are some positives I want to take away. Also, Joe Judge is kind of bringing in his mantra, bringing his beliefs to the locker room, to the front office, to the ownership, and making people believe again. Even though the record may not be what people wanted, like you said, there was an opportunity there. They were knocking on the door of the playoffs. To say what you will about the NFC least, making the playoffs would have been making the playoffs. So the Redskins got there. They played a game on a Saturday night against Tampa Bay, and that could have been the Giants. They were, a half away.
I would have loved to see that. I really would have.
Because we played Tampa Bay very well throughout the season, and obviously everybody, if you're a Giant fan listening and you don't know our history with Tom Brady in the playoffs, he would have been scared to play. He's coming to the Meadowlands on a Saturday night. It's not an easy place to play.
Weather-wise alone, a night game coming to Jersey at night in the playoffs. It's never been easy for any quarterback.
And it's funny. You have nothing to lose when you're a 6-10 team and you make the playoffs. You really have nothing to lose. No one's expecting you to do anything. And that's kind of like those Super Bowl teams that the Giants had. They weren't dominant teams by any means during the regular season. They caught fire in the playoffs. They had talent, and they went on a roll. I mean, I don't think they would have gone, necessarily far in the playoffs. But when you have nothing to lose, it's scary to get to that point. I hope they have the same mentality towards the end of the season, just playing hard. I think Joe Judge has them on the right track, mentally. Patrick Graham did a great job with the defense. One thing about defense, Giants have had some great defenses in the past. Even when, very good teams in some of our bad years with Eli, the biggest problem and why they rank so poorly on a lot of these, seasons was that they were on the field too much. There was 3 and out, and they're on the field constantly. So we had almost no offensive production last year, and they still managed to put out a good product on defense consistently and keep us in games. So that says a lot. Now, if we had an offense that was scoring points and taking up clock time, God knows that defense could have been even better. So I mean, I'm excited to see what they can do if they get a little help from the offensive side of the ball, controlling the ball. All right, so going back to the offensive production, the elephant in the room is Daniel Jones. One of the worst seasons we've seen out of a quarterback wearing the big blue jersey. 2,943 yards passing in 14 games, 11 touchdowns, 10 interceptions. His rookie season, he put up 24 touchdowns in 12 games, 3,000 yards. Would have translated to about a 4,000-yard season if he played all 16 games. Was a pretty good rookie season. I saw a lot of good points out of him. I still haven't seen, that big win that you want to see out of a quarterback or that big comeback from him in that rookie season that we did with Eli. Eli, took the Giants down the field to beat the Cowboys on the last drive, the last game of the year, which I thought was like a defining moment for Eli. I don't know if a lot of people remember that. But we haven't seen, anything out of Daniel Jones in that manner at all. The last time we saw seasons like this from a quarterback in a Giants uniform, Kerry Collins in 2003. 3,000 yards passing, 13 touchdowns, and 16 interceptions. Dave Brown, 94 to 96, had about 11, 12 touchdowns a season, and about 2,400, 3,000 yards passing. I mean, these are just dismal, awful years by quarterbacks, and we're coming off one with Daniel Jones. So I want to ask you guys. I'm going to start with you, Eric, on this. What are the reasons? Why is he failing?
I think it's a continuation from his rookie year, and I think it goes to ball security as one of the main things. If they can't trust him to not turn the ball over, they will have difficulty giving him the option to, make his own mind up at the line of scrimmage, maybe take some shots downfield, because the fumbling has continued to be an issue, which then does put the defense back on the field quickly. It changes possessions. So I think really a lot of it goes back to ball security and what comfort level the coaching staff has in him to make the right decision. If he has to tuck the ball away, run 90 yards and trip over the 10-yard line, things like that. So my biggest thing for him is decision-making and really focusing on reducing the turnovers.
John?
Yeah, I mean, one thing that I always think about is Daniel Jones, is he who we thought he was? Dave Gettleman was super high on him, but no scouts had him projected to be a first-round pick. Really, no one else that you talked to had him even mocked in the first round. So is Daniel Jones performing the way he was expected to perform by most people besides the general manager who drafted him? That's my first question. Yeah, he had some big games in 2019. I think he had a 5-touchdown game and went over 300 yards a few times. But it will be interesting to see now once he has a true number one receiver. Slayton was his almost number one receiver last year, who was a 5th-round pick, right? Now that he has a true number one, a big body that can go up and high point a ball, is he going to throw the ball downfield a little more? If you do look at his numbers last year, he was a pretty efficient quarterback when he was protected. It was on the plays where he was being pressured, being rushed, scrambling, where his turnovers came, obviously, and his completion percentage is just hit the toilet. So you think of a guy who has scrambling ability as someone who actually can perform better on the run, but I don't think Daniel Jones is that guy. I think he can scramble when he needs to run, but he's not the kind of guy that's going to get more efficient as he gets outside the tackle box. So it'll be interesting this year to see, can he grow? He's got the new offensive coordinator last year, new head coach last year. Again, we talked about the offensive line, but no training camp, no preseason games. Can we see a bigger step forward this year? And I think we need to, right? Or else he's kind of on the chopping block, as well as Dave Gettleman. Dave Gettleman kind of attached himself to Daniel Jones as his guy. So I think if they fail this year, they're probably both out next year.
Yeah, this is definitely a make it or break it year for both Gettleman and Daniel Jones. I'm hoping that they both, succeed. But if they don't, we really need to move on and not get bunkered down with a quarterback like this. A lot of these reasons can turn into excuses pretty quickly. Reason you have no control over. Gettleman's got the control, and if they these reasons persist, they're going to become excuses, and I refuse to make excuses for a quarterback anymore. I did it too much with Eli.
And I think Joe Judge is exactly that mindset. He doesn't want – there's no such thing as an excuse. So,
yeah, that's the thing that I like about Judge. He's coming from Belichick. Belichick does not have a lot of coaches that have had NFL success. I mean, he's got a very unique personality, and it's almost like he doesn't give you the last ingredient for the secret sauce. You're going to leave him with a ton of knowledge, but it doesn't necessarily translate into another head coach. He's the genius, that thinker mentality of, give me facts, figures. He's not about making you happy. He's about just, results. That's it. That's all he wants. And so he's got that thinker-director mentality. Most head coaches are directors and socializers. Most assistant coaches are those, bark at you, rah, 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 and not all those guys make great head coaches. And Belichick's just surrounded himself with very good coaches, but not necessarily like the lineage of Parcells or Bill Walsh or Mike Holmgren disciples that have gone on to be great coaches for whatever reason. I'm hoping that's different with Joe Judge. They're buying into what he's selling, that can continue, but it's going to need success. You never see, a coach that just has continued guys running through a wall for him that keep losing. Maybe Jeff Fisher. I don't know. Jeff Fisher was around for forever.
The consistent 8-8 Jeff Fisher.
The guy had the longest tenure of an 8-8 coach I've ever seen in my entire life. But we don't. Obviously we want that. Our standard is much higher than a lot of other teams.
So just going back to John's question of, is he who we thought he was? I think he is who we thought he was. It goes back to what he thought Gettleman thought he was. And I thought that Gettleman at that time also took a lot of advice from David Cutcliffe, who was the Mannings. Well, yes, he was the coach at Duke, but he was also the quarterback guru of the Mannings. And I thought he really took a lot.
Maybe Archie Manning was the quarterback guru of the Mannings. I don't,
you
know what I mean?
That is true. That is very true. And so I go back to, even on draft night, if you looked at the perception Giant fans had of that pick at that time, it was very negative for the most part, based on value, which you had to understand that Daniel Jones hears that too. So that's an additional layer of pressure that he's feeling on top of that to kind of justify that he was picked at that number, hearing from everybody else, well, you could have had him at 16, you could have him at 17, you could have had him at 36, and just bringing that pressure on himself. How has that affected or impacted him in the New York media?
I think part of the reason that Eli likes them, that they like Daniel Jones, and he had that kind of persona of Eli, and the guy's squeaky clean and he can handle it. He's not really controversial. He's not going to get eaten up by the New York media, which is, it is important. And some of these guys have just failed miserably, taking the criticism of New York, the whole thing. I couldn't even tell you what this guy sounds like. I barely heard this guy talk, even in some of his interviews. You know what I mean? He stays out of the spotlight, which is good. I mean, he can handle that. But is that what we need out of a fourth pick overall in the draft? Again, everybody says that he would have been, around a lot longer. You could have traded down to 9. If you're worried about Washington taking him earlier, then you could have traded down to that spot before. They didn't do any work to try to get more value, because you still could have got him at a later position and added another pick. And some of these other picks, I mean, he's done some good things with Slayton and a couple good late round picks. There's value there.
Yeah, but when you fail in your first and second round picks, that's when you set your franchise back. You can have a home run as a 5th round pick, but that's not going to win you a Super Bowl.
Yeah, when you have 3 consecutive picks in the top 6, you're going to make it or break it. You look at the Browns, the world is upside down right now. People are looking at the Browns as a model on how to rebuild your franchise. And I can't believe that, when you look at some of their picks, you're like, wow, okay, yeah, they did pretty good, with some of these. I mean, Baker, I wasn't huge on Baker, but hey, the guy, he's getting it done. So,
but he might be that kind of guy the Giants would need, just a rah-rah. He is a guy, outside of tools or how he plays, is he gets teammates on his side. He's out there. You could see them jumping in his arms. He's jumping in their arms, and that does go a long way. If you have talent around you, which he does, I think it goes a long way. If you have that rah-rah, get your team, it can help to gel them. And maybe Daniel Jones needs to show a little bit more of that fire to his teammates.
Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't work if you start losing, though. You see like a guy like Baker, if he starts have a couple bad seasons in a row, he'll that doesn't work. Guys don't buy into that unless you're winning, and now he's winning. So I mean, I'd love to see that out of Daniel Jones. He doesn't seem like he's got that kind of personality. We'll see what on the field. Eli didn't seem like that either, but guys respected Eli. So,
but I think Eli also had a lot of professionals on his team. He had a lot of veterans, and I don't know if Daniel Jones has had that around him. Per se, I think Eli was in an environment where he didn't have to be that guy. There were defensive leaders,
that
were in the and they were kind of the face of the team. Eli drove the bus, but there was face of those teams where he can kind of sit in the background, and then he would drop a nugget every now and then that would get somebody's attention, and it would work for him.
Well, Eli was likable. Eli's funny. He's just got that dry sense of humor. Him and Peyton are both funny guys. But again, you're talking about, I like the leadership, like you're talking about Chris Nee, David Deal, Sean O'Hara. Great guys, locker room guys, linemen. There's a lot of big personalities, good leaders on that, and that was a classy, franchise. All those guys. There was no, real a-holes on that team, or no big huge egos. There's a few here and there, but nothing crazy.
You also had a veteran coach,
Coughlin,
kind of directing that too, and maybe Judge. And that's what we all hope as Giant fans, is that Judge gets to that level of Coughlin or even better. I mean, 2 Super Bowls is pretty good.
I'd take that.
Right, exactly.
It's hard right now. The personality of coaches is very different now.
And I know we're going to move on real quick, but I just want to say, in defense of Daniel Jones, and I think we've talked about this off air, as the COVID season, they didn't have a lot of time in the off season to work together. Between one year to the next for him, off season and working with your teammates, and actually, with new coordinators and things like that. And off season is very important, and I do think maybe that held back some, not just him, but the team in general.
And probably game planning around Saquon Barkley, who immediately gets pulled out of an option for 14.5 of your games, that's a problem.
Absolutely. All right, the Giants made some headlines with their very active free agency season. Definitely the most aggressive of the NFC East teams. Let's talk about who you like out of the group. I'm going to read off all the names, the big names that they signed. Leonard Williams, Kenny Golladay, Adoree Jackson, John Ross, Mike Glennon, Kyle Rudolph, Ryan Anderson, Zach Fulton, Reggie Ragland, Devontae Downs, Ifeadi Odin Nigbo, sorry for the pronunciation there, Devontae Booker, and Austin Johnson. We let Tomlinson and Gallman go. What do you guys like about this whole free agency season?
I'll give just a couple that I like, and maybe one or two that I didn't really think was necessary. Obviously, I think they had to do the Leonard Williams deal, and I don't think they actually overpaid for what they got from him. But I think trading for him, giving up a draft pick, him performing the way he did on a team that needed that defensive stalwart in the middle and getting those sacks, I think that was an automatic. Adoree Jackson, I think that's also, it really helps solidify that backfield. If we don't have the pass rush, and we're going to look at the draft later, if we don't get an edge to also help Leonard Williams put some pressure on the quarterback, that defensive backfield is very important. Again, I don't think it was an overreach for what they paid for him. I do have to say, Gettleman made it rain this offseason, though, with the amount of money that he was just dropping on everybody. And just a couple real quick that I could have gone either way on, or that I thought they may have overpaid for. Devontae Booker, to me, is, they signed him. It wasn't a huge contract, but I think there's some places in the draft, later in the draft, they could have found a running back that's a rookie. Booker has had the opportunity and a couple starts with the two different teams now, and he never really has produced. And if I understand if they're looking just for backup, and they have the expectation Barkley's going to play 15, 16, 17 games this year, which coming off injury,
From your lips to God's ears.
That's a lot. If he is just the backup, okay. But I do believe, in the draft, you can always find one of those running backs. So could that money been spent somewhere else or just differently? And then Golladay, I do believe they needed that position. Maybe they could have done something in the draft, and maybe they will. But for the amount they paid for him, I just hope he stays on the field. Those injuries, and maybe he sat out last year knowing the Lions weren't very good, and he didn't want to get re-injured, and that's a possibility. And I know they cleared him medically before they gave him the amount of money they did, but I just hope he stays on the field.
John, what do you like?
Yeah, I'll start there with Golladay. I think they did probably pay a little more per year than a lot of fans would have been comfortable with, but at the end of the day, it's not my money. Now, there is a salary cap, so it does prevent you from
to explode.
Right, so this is going to be a low year for the salary cap, but it's projected to go up huge. That's why when you look at his average salary over the next 4 years, I think you're paying a little bit of a premium for him this year. But by the time he gets into year 3 and year 4 of that contract, he's not going to be one of the higher paid wide receivers in football. And I think at that point, the fact that you locked him in for 4 years under this contract, he will be a very valuable wide receiver as he gets deeper, if he can stay on the field, which obviously has been an issue. But you got to take a chance. And we did need a number 1 wide receiver. I believe he was probably the best free agent wide receiver in the class this year. So I actually really do like that pick. I think it's going to strengthen the team. I think it's going to strengthen Daniel Jones. Having a big option like that in the red zone, God, I hope his touchdown total goes way up this year. And, he should, as long as the offensive line can afford him a little bit of time, I do see him taking more shots down the field. And again, we'll see what they add in the draft, but they might add another weapon to the wide receiver arsenal this year. So love that pick. Love the Adoree Jackson pickup. I think one of the moves that'll fly under the radar a little bit is the Kyle Rudolph signing. Not so much of what you can expect to get out of Kyle Rudolph on the field, but the belief is that he's going to have a positive impact on Evan Ingram. Whether it's a veteran, he's been in the NFL, he's had a very successful career, he's a smart kid out of Notre Dame. I can see him having a positive impact, and I think Evan Ingram needs something like that, because obviously we're talking about Daniel Jones and make or break years. Evan Ingram's make or break year too. The Giants aren't going to bring him back if he has another year like he did last year. So I like the Kyle Rudolph signing just simply because I think it's going to have a positive impact to the tight end position for the New York Giants.
His hands bother me. He's dropped so many balls and crucial balls, Ingram, that it's one of those things, like every time he drops a pass now, I'm going to be throwing something against the TV. It almost reminds me of Tiki in the early years, where Tiki couldn't hold onto the ball, and it drove me nuts. And even when Tiki was phenomenal, when he fumbled, it was like, oh, here we go again. I bet Ingram's earned that bad kind of reputation right now, which I can't stand. I do like Rudolph just from a veteran standpoint. The one guy that we haven't talked about is John Ross. I think that was a steal of a signing. A guy that was, I think, drafted 8th by Cincinnati. Definitely humbled. I think Galladay was in the same draft as John Ross. And he was like a 2nd, 3rd, or 4th round guy. So I think that's got to be a little humbling to John Ross. This guy's wants to get a better chance. Deep threat, a lot of speed. For $1 million, I mean, we need more help than just Galladay. But I do like that signing. We got a big body. It could be Plaxico 2.0 with his abilities. Adoree Jackson, I like that as well. I think we're going to have one of the best defensive backfields in the league. Leonard Williams, there's not a lot of guys that can run down a quarterback from that nose tackle position. He's going to take double teams. He's going to take a lot of blockers away from the linebackers, and potentially, he can just cause havoc back there, which is awesome.
What do you have? 11.5 sacks last year, something like that.
That's insane from defensive tackle,
which is great because the edge rushers on the Giants didn't come anywhere near that.
Well, that's the one thing that I'm concerned about, is that we didn't address the edge rusher in the free agency period. So I mean, did they even think about a guy like Clowney? I mean, I understand there's injury issues there, but he just signed with $10 million for, if we've got money to spend, that's a guy that they could have probably had. And I'll tell you what, our defense would be scary if that guy is healthy and produces,
He did have the same number of sacks as the 3 of us in this room last year.
That's true. That's very true. But I'm just, there's got to be somebody out there that they could have looked at.
And that's why so we'll get into this in a little bit, but I think it's a little bit of foreshadowing. When a general manager and a head coach talk about what they're going to do in the offseason, they basically have a board for the draft and a board for the free agents. And you look at the draft board and you say, I think we can get that guy or that guy. And then what's available in free agency. Now, in free agency, they went out and got their wide receiver, and they went out and they strengthened they obviously grabbed a top-end cornerback. So they start knocking out positions. So does that now tell you they're valuing the defensive end, the edge rusher position in the draft? And are they evaluating the offensive line opportunities even in the early second round for an interior? So when we get into the draft, it'll be interesting to see, what players are we thinking about, what players are the Giants rumored to be talking about, and can we forecast what they're looking at in the draft based on their free agency?
Yeah, and I was going to say in free agency, I was going to go back to that the line was not really addressed at all. And there were some premium players out there that they could have spent money on, and they didn't. So it goes to what's the plan? Let's see it. It's going to unfold in the next week based on the draft coming up next weekend.
A very young line, and they're not spending a lot of money on it at all right now. They're hoping that it all comes together. There's a lot of good prospects on that line. I think, if they're coached up, that they could possibly get there. There was good things, mostly in the run game. A lot of these younger guys are very good run blocks. Shane Lemieux at guard, very good run blocker. The pull, the trap, but his pass blocking isn't the best. So we got to protect our quarterback and keep him upright. And some of these draft picks, although they're good in one aspect, they're not very well rounded. And hopefully they can be coached up to that level. Just one last thing with the free agency: Tomlinson and Gallman. Just give me a real quick. Was it a good move letting them go? Is Devontae Booker equal to or better than Gallman? What do you think the reasons were for these decisions?
Yeah, let me take the defensive line, and I'll let Eric take the running back, because I agree with what Eric's opinion on the running back. So in terms of Tomlinson, loved him as a player. I think they had to prioritize who they were going to sign this offseason. So the fact that I wanted to see them sign Leonard Williams, especially after the season he had last year. So if they had to make a choice between those two, I also think there's not going to be any high-end defensive tackle that's going to be like a top 10 pick in the draft this year. But I think that there's a good amount of like day 2 and day 3 guys who can be in that rotation, similar to Tomlinson. So I think you can go out and you can grab yourself a 3rd round, 4th round defensive tackle that can fill the shoes of Tomlinson, but you weren't going to find anyone that were going to take the place of Leonard Williams.
Well, we do have Dexter Lawrence, who is a good guy that holds off the double teams on linebackers. So I'm still up on him. I don't think that was a terrible pick in that second first-round pick of 2019. There's a lot of potential there with him. So I'm eager to see how he progresses if he fills in that spot. Again, remember, this is a 3-4 defense, but it's not a strict 3-4 defense. He'll go 4-3. He'll move guys around. A lot of these guys in this so-called 3-4, they've got 2 defensive tackles on the line at one point. So it's not a true, one solo defensive tackle. So it's a very interesting defense when you actually look at the X's and O's of it. So I'm excited to see what happens there. Eric, what do you think about Gallman and Booker?
Yeah, regarding Gallman, I don't believe the Giants ever had long-term plans for him. If they did, they wouldn't have signed Devontae Freeman last year, picked up Deion Lewis. I don't ever think they saw Gallman as the guy, even if Barkley did get hurt. I think they kind of got their hand forced just by the way things evolved last year. Personally, I think and I appreciate Gallman's drive. I appreciate his personality. I think he kept going at it. They kept saying, we're not going to play you. He kept saying, I'm going to play well enough that you have to play me. But and I don't think he got a lot of money from San Francisco. I think that actually is a good fit for him. So I'm happy for him.
Do we know what the numbers are on that contract? I haven't seen anything.
They actually were undisclosed, but being that they signed him as possibly being a 3rd running back there, or they've had injury histories in San Francisco with the running back, so he could be the number 1 by a couple weeks into the season. But yeah, I just think running backs at this point, outside of your top guys, which they drafted Barkley. What do you got there?
You want to know the contract?
Sure.
1 year, $990,000.
Yeah, so the guy for
under $1 million. Yeah.
Wow.
So even then, that means the rest of the NFL teams that had Gallman possibly they didn't value him as much either.
They could have gotten Booker and kept him.
That's
that price. That's insane.
That is true. So we'll look into the draft after. I think even if they signed Booker to kind of replace Gallman, I think they still draft a running back somewhere, day 2 or day 3, depending on how the rest of the draft falls and what needs were filled. But personally, I would like to keep Gallman, especially if it's 1 year, 900 and whatever thousands it was. And I hope Booker does more than I think, but I've just never been a fan after the times I've seen him play for 2 other teams.
Yeah, I really agree with both of you on that. I hate to be agreeing with all this stuff. We're supposed to have a little controversy in this thing, which hopefully when we get down to this year's picks and everything like that. But
well, there's actually one other free agent signing that I don't think many people talked about, and it'll be interesting to see if it ever pans out. But Danny Shelton, 2015 number 12 overall pick, signed as a free agent this offseason as well. Not really making headlines. He's had an injury history. I think he failed a physical with some other team before we signed him. So I think it's a total flyer. I don't know what the contract was. But there's a guy that was he was a number 12 overall pick out of Washington. He's a diesel nose tackle if he could stay on the field. So, that's just one other piece that you can rotate into that defensive line if he ends up being healthy and can play.
I like those kind of guys, the guys that, have something to prove or, maybe just one last chance. You see a couple guys like, I love the story about Waller out in Vegas. He's a guy that,
stud.
Almost wasn't in the league, and he came out and the guy's an absolute stud right now. So you like to hear those comeback stories. I would love if we could have a comeback story of a guy that, just had his last chance with the Giants and he really just shined. That would be awesome.
And for the offseason, going back to the continuing with the free agency, it seems almost like there was a hierarchy for Gettleman. He spent a lot of money on the top guys, Williams, Jackson, Galladay, and then he took some flyers, Shelton, Ross, even Rudolph. I think it was kind of a flyer, and maybe it is a locker room. They're paying him for being a locker room presence, but you could almost see the trickle down. We pay our top guys. We're going to take some flyers on these guys. We're going to have he again, looking at the board, he had it organized where he saw the potential that maybe Kevin sees in John Ross. I'm not so sure. I as a Giant fan, again, hey, the flyer, if it works, it's a bonus because you're not paying a lot for him.
Very little risk.
Yes,
and that's the key right there. It's very little risk and very high reward if he can do anything, potentially that he was projected to do when he was drafted.
Did they say, are they going to have him returning kicks? Because honestly, I think that's his go-to at this point. The guy can fly. I just don't know if he can get open as a receiver, and I don't know if he can have the catch radius. But if they put him as a kick returner or a punt returner,
does Jackson return kicks too?
Dory Jackson is a kick returner.
I thought I saw that as well too. So that, that'd be great.
And if they end up drafting Waddle, there's another kick returner.
I mean, I can't remember the last time the Giants returned a punt or a kick. We've never had a real threat in that thing. And special teams is 1/3 of the game. It's overlooked all the time. The rule changes have really, I think it's probably not that much anymore because they've made so many rule changes and everything like that. But it would be nice if we could get some points on the board.
But the Giants do have kind of they're cautious now. Jason Sehorn returning kicks and blows out his knee. I think they still have some bad thoughts about that happening. So Dory Jackson, they're signing him for a lot of money. Are they going to want to risk putting him back there and then potentially him getting injured on a kick or punt return? If they do, and he doesn't get hurt and he actually makes it work.
Didn't they have Odell returning kicks for a little bit? Yeah.
Well, I think Odell just ran on the field, honestly. They're like, all right, special teams, and he just ran on the field.
Yeah, I mean, his special teams, OBJ, I think the pinnacle of his special teams is when he got in a fight with the kicking net on the sideline after his little temper tantrum. So, not to bring up the negative stuff from the past, but that seems to be the theme here. All right, so we're just talking a little bit about the past Gettleman drafts. He's going into his 4th draft now. First draft was Saquon in the 4 spot. Oh, no, I'm sorry, the 2 spot. Right behind Baker Mayfield. I'm a firm believer that if you've got a top 5 draft pick, it's got to go for one of 3 things. It's got to go for your franchise quarterback, an offensive tackle to protect your quarterback, or a can't-miss defensive tackle or edge rusher. I mean, I think those are the positions that you're going to get 10 years out of or more. Running back is such a short-term position. These guys, really pinnacle, hit their peak at 25, 26 years old, and then it's progressively downhill. The Frank Gores of the world that play for 20 years.
Isn't his son in college now?
Probably.
I think him and his son had a competition of who would outrush who.
Yeah, I mean, the guys like that, Jerome Bettis, they don't last that long. Adrian Peterson, they're not around anymore. You can't just count on one of these guys. Is Saquon a guy like that? Maybe, but he's coming off an injury, and that's the risk that you take. And it's the hardest position in the NFL now. The players are bigger, faster, stronger, and it's impossible to stay alive in this league in that. Obviously we all agree that he took Daniel Jones too early. Nothing we can do about that now. Dexter Lawrence, again, I like that pick. DeAndre Baker obviously didn't work out for us. He
pulled the trigger too soon on that one.
Yeah. So
is he on the Packers now? Is that where he ended up?
He's on the Packers. Yeah.
I have a bad feeling he's going to come back to haunt us.
It could, but again, so that was just kind of a wasted pick. Andrew Thomas last year, we took what was projected to be the 3rd or 4th best tackle on the board last year. We took him in the 4th spot. We didn't take Tristan Wirfs, who went to Tampa Bay and has a Super Bowl ring right now with Tom Brady and did a pretty good job protecting him. We didn't take Mekhi Becton, who was actually, had a great season with the Jets for a rookie. So he's one of the top-rated rookies last year as well. So I'm not going to say that we swung and missed with Andrew Thomas. He didn't get great grades last year on a very, underperforming line altogether. We're going to see what happens. It sometimes takes you 2 or 3 years to develop in the league. We're, hopeful that that's going to work to our advantage. I love the pick of McKinney. Again, we have some serious depth on our defensive backfield right now, and he's a guy that can really turn it up. Matt Pert, another offensive tackle they took in the 3rd round last year. Again, a project offensive tackle. Got good experience last year. We'll see what he does. He's going to, he's probably going to be the starter on the right side with Solder backing him up. That's what the roster looks like right now.
Yeah, he's projected in the starting lineup right now.
Right.
So
I mean, Solder's well rested, taking that year off last year. We'll see, and I think we get some good leadership and coaching from him. He can help develop that line as well. So, what do you guys think? What jumps out at you? Has Gettleman is there anything that really jumps out at you for the good that he's done with his drafts in the last 3 years?
Yeah, I think the bottom half of the draft has seemed to be where his sweet spot is. It seems like he can evaluate those lower rounds well. His issue, in my opinion, in the in the top rounds is he falls in love with a guy, and whether the scouting was awry or he just drafted someone that was not valued in the position that he was drafted, he's just kind of swung and missed at a whole lot of first, second, third round picks. You look at the last few years, a lot of the guys have not, when you draft in the top 3 rounds, really, if you did a good job, they should be starting year 1, definitely by year 2. And you look at the list of guys, and not a ton of them are starting right now. You almost have as many guys in the bottom half of the draft that are making impacts. Another critique of Gettleman in his drafting is that he kind of falls in love with big conference players. So he might take, the third best wide receiver on a team instead of taking the number 1 wide receiver in a smaller conference. So that's a critique, and you can kind of look and I'm not going to say that this was a bad pick at all because Tay Crowder ended up panning out, but how often is it that you see an SEC player being taken as Mr. Irrelevant? Usually that's a smaller conference school by the time you get into that draft pick, the 255th pick. So that's a critique of Dave Gettleman as well. And for those of you watching this podcast on YouTube, I'm going to throw up a picture right now. You're going to see what his draft room was last year. His virtual draft room was literally a fold-out plastic table with a monitor and like a couple of little notepads. I just don't know if he's...
What wasn't quite as nice as this unfinished basement that we're in right now.
This is way better than Dave Gettleman's draft room. I don't know if he's as connected with the analytics and with really understanding the game as some of these other general managers are. It seems like he's a little bit old schooled. He sees a guy on tape or sees him at his Senior Bowl like he did with Daniel Jones, and he just falls in love with a guy, and that's the guy he needs to have. And I think that's the trouble he gets himself into with the first, second, sometimes third round guys.
They typically say if you keep drafting at the top of the draft, the previous draft wasn't that good. And if they're continually drafting at the top of the draft, I mean, they're drafting 11 this year, and that's low for them because they've been much higher the past 3 to 4 years. So I think right there you can kind of start to grade on drafting. I also think there's a couple of terms is value for him, and there's the false narrative, as he would say, about trading down. I think that he never has done it. He says that he's never been offered anything that was good enough. Who to believe? I don't know. But the value of where he's taken players is really my biggest issue with the drafts. I think Barkley he was a good to great college player. I think his combine was amazing, and it started that narrative of we can't miss out on this once in a generational player, as he would say. But again, where in the draft it was is the potential problem because now you're locked into that and you may have missed out on something else. Again, we've talked about this off air, and I hate to sometimes do the what ifs, but the what ifs of that draft were having Josh Allen and Nick Chubb versus taking Saquon where they did. So I just think if we keep drafting up here, there's something in the system that's not working, and if you're unwilling to change your system, you're not going to be around very much longer.
There's a couple things that jump out in the late rounds. I love Tay Crowder. I love that Mr. Irrelevant. I heard his name a lot last year. I didn't know that he was Mr. Irrelevant until I actually did a little research on him. I was like, wow. He said he was really – you heard his name a lot. I mean, Blake Martinez really shined, and he did a great job as that other inside linebacker. Another guy that jumped out at me that I just recently learned about was Darnay Holmes. This is his first year. He moved to a slot corner. He had 39 targets and didn't allow a touchdown. That was, he had some good coverage. Again, we have some depth to that defensive backfield, and that's a guy that probably nobody knows about that they moved to a thing. So whoever's coaching these guys up to these positions or coming up with this plan is doing a very good job with that. So I'm very happy with that whole thing. 2019, Dairy Slayton, again, 5th round. We talked about him a little bit. He's a 50 catch, 750-yard guy. We addressed, Galladay as our number 1. I think Slayton's not a number 1. He's clearly not a number 1. I don't think we're going to get more. I don't think we're going to get really less. I think if we get somebody else to take some of the pressure, you're going to see this guy run slants all day and just rack up yards and catches, and he's going to produce for us. But we got to get around and support them. So late rounds, he's doing great. Again, Julian Love in the 4th round in 2019. Another guy that's versatile. He plays all the positions. There's guys, and there's some value in some of these picks later on. It's the early stuff that I think we all agree he just he's missed on, and it's not that he's missed completely. He's just taking guys too early. I think all of these guys. I mean, Barkley wouldn't have been there, obviously, but the other guys would have been there. Now, if we don't get Barkley in that first round, and let's say we go edge, we go to a different position there. The guy in the second round that we could have had was Nick Chubb. So think about us with Nick Chubb and a better, we would have been a much better team. Not that Nick Chubb is not Saquon, but for value-wise, in that second round, Nick Chubb was a pretty good running back,
One positive I will say is that they took Barkley at number 2. To Gettleman's benefit right now, the other pick probably would have been Darnold, and thus far Darnold hasn't shown much either. And it could be the team that he was on.
Yeah,
and
just wait until this season.
But in Gettleman's favor, it does go because most people had him. If they didn't take Barkley, they probably would have went Darnold. And again, spin that forward. How does it all play out? You put Darnold in there instead of Barkley and Jones, but maybe a little bit. I believe Gettleman didn't see much in Darnold at that point.
And I agree. There really wasn't a lot of great options when you look back on that draft. There's nobody that jumps out like, oh my God, we could have had.
I think Bradley Chubb was 5th though, and that's an edge that.
Yes.
Staying healthy, he's
right.
amazing.
And you can't. A lot of these guys have gotten hurt when you see a lot of this, and you can't tell if he was to the Giants, would he have gotten that same injury? You never know.
And honestly, everybody says, "Hey, Nick Chubb, could have been our guy," but the reality was he wasn't even the number 1 Georgia running back drafted that year.
Right.
So
but there's a lot of running backs out there, and I think when you look at running backs, the top 2 running backs right now in the league, Derrick Henry and Dalvin Cook, were both second round. I think 44th or overall picks in the draft,
which is where you draft a running back,
right? So there, you look at Zeke. The problem is, Zeke, you got to pay him after their rookie contracts. They're pretty much at their peak when those contracts have to be renegotiated, and now you see Zeke had 900 yards last year.
I was going to say, was that a fluke or is that the beginning of a trend? And if it's a beginning of a trend for Dallas, that's not good.
Well, Dallas has got a whole bunch of other I don't even know where, Jerry Jones loves just to throw money around. And, I think his signing of Dak at $40 million just shows that this salary cap is going to explode. And Jerry Jones has inside information on that. So that was a telltale of that. All right, 17 years ago today, in 2004, the Giants drafted Eli Manning. Okay? So 2 Super Bowls later.
Hang on one second.
Yep.
They drafted Phillip Rivers.
They drafted Phillip Rivers.
They traded for Eli Manning.
For Eli Manning. Okay. So anyway, that was probably, it was a turning point in the season. And I just love we're doing our draft show. So our draft is less than a week away. We've talked a little bit about it, but let's say I want you to list in order. What are our 3 biggest needs we have to address in the draft? Eric, first.
Okay, we're saying what I think they need or what I would like.
What are the 3 biggest needs that the Giants need to address?
I would say edge, offensive tackle, and I would go receiver just because I think you need to keep giving the toys. And Gettleman has a history of he put one person in a spot, and he's going to try to fill in around that person and give him all the right tools because if it doesn't work, again, he might not be around next year for it. So I do think that edge and getting some more pass rush and some more heat on the quarterback would definitely help out that secondary, which is, really good, but it could be even better. And then offensive tackle to protect the quarterback and receiver.
John.
Okay, yeah. So I'm going to go first. I'm going to go offensive line. I don't know if they definitely need to go offensive tackle. I know the first few tackles on the board can also be shifted down to guard. So I would say even it'd be cool with interior offensive line. I think guard is a weakness that we need to work on. You got Will Hernandez, you got Lemieux, you got this new guy that they just brought on. What's his name? Zach Fulton from Houston. He's slotted in actually to start over Lemieux right now. But I think guard can be an area of significant upgrade. Then I would say edge. And the only reason I rank offensive line over edge is I feel like the biggest need for the Giants right now is offense. The defense was pretty stout last year. So in terms of need, I think they need to continue working on their offense. But obviously with their sack total from their edge rushers last year, or lack thereof, edge is obviously 1 and 1A in terms of need. And then third, I want to add more depth to the defensive backfield. I think that our starting defensive backfield can stack up against anyone. But it seems like every year multiple guys are going down. And I just want to, and I don't think it's not 1 or 1A, but I think that they need to address it in the 3rd or 4th round. Grab yourself a decent D-back like a Darnay Holmes, who they got in the 3rd or 4th round. Bring in another guy like that you can use as some depth in the defensive backfield.
And I think that's a valid point in today's NFL. Offenses that do 4 wides, you can't have linebackers covering slot receivers because that's a lose-lose. So yeah, I do agree that defensive back somewhere in maybe day 2 would definitely be a positive.
The term edge has really taken over the spot because it's kind of a hybrid of an outside linebacker, defensive end. I think the number one need for the Giants is that Lawrence Taylor type outside linebacker. I'm not going to say edge. There's guys that are listed as edge. I mean, I'm happy to take a good defensive end that's a pass rusher, the whole deal. But we're weak at outside linebacker. We're doing it by committee right now, and I don't like the idea of shuffling guys in and out for, this guy's good on 3rd down, this guy's good on 1st and 2nd down. I want a 4-down outside linebacker or defensive end that can do it all when they need to do it. That's the number one priority. The 86, 91 Super Bowls, or 90, whatever the years, were built on that Big Blue Wrecking Crew defense. Lawrence Taylor, Harry Carson, Carl Banks, Pepper Johnson, Gary Reasons. There's just a lineage of great linebackers that have played throughout the Giants that turned into the defensive end position in the 2000s with Michael Strahan, Justin Tuck, OC, JPP, Matthias Kiwanuka. They just kept reloading at that position, and they got in these guys' faces every single play. There was a guy on his back, and we just have not seen that in a long time. They went away from that whole business model that worked to do God knows what otherwise. But with Dexter Lawrence taking on multiple, linemen, rushing up the middle because he's such a force, and guys like guys. Sorry.
Well, just while you're looking it up, I think that some of that goes to just the way football's played now. And if we're looking at the draft, outside linebacker and edge, it really is a definitive spot because the edges that are edges can't get into pass defense, which does go to they have to rotate players in and out. But I just think that's the way the game is going, and the outside linebackers aren't as much of a rushing linebacker as they used to be. I mean, you brought up LT. LT was the original edge outside linebacker combo, and today the way the game is designed and the way that players coming up through, Pee-wee, high school, they really are slotted into certain ones where they're not really able, a lot of them are not able to do that. And in this draft where they're drafting, I guess there's a difference between need and what we're going to do, but I don't see an outside linebacker per se that high in the draft, maybe later in the draft.
Right. So a guy like Leonard Williams that can push guys back and take on multiple blockers, a guy like Dexter Lawrence too, that holds off the linebackers, stuff like that. You've got the interior pretty much taken care of. You need somebody outside to take the pressure, put the pressure on as well, because they can't block everybody. So if you got guys rushing from every angle and not just the middle, it's going to create a lot more havoc, and we're going to have a lot more success there. So number one to me is that edge outside linebacker. I would love to see an outside linebacker, but we'll see if one's available at that kind of level that we need. Offensive line, I think they have not addressed it enough. They don't have they didn't take the best guy in the draft last year, which they should have. I would love a guy that's kind of a hybrid, offensive tackle, offensive guard. There's one guy in the draft that sticks out to me that kind of fits that. And, I think we are not in the clear with wide receiver, Galladay. I think Slayton and Shepard are both number 3s. I don't think they're better than that. I think we need a good number 2 wide receiver, a deep threat. I'm thinking John Ross, if he, that's high hopes. We can't, the depend on that, but that's, a best case scenario that he can step up and fill that role. But there's a couple guys that, have been compared to, somebody that's on the Chiefs that runs real fast. So I think that's something that we have to look at as well. So, all right. So now what I want you guys to do, we're going to wind this up pretty soon. I want you to just give me a couple of the players that you like at those positions. And then after that, we'll go around the whole table again with that. Who are your top prospects? What you're thinking, and then I want you to give me the guy that you want the Giants to pick at that 11th spot. You can say that they're going to trade up. You can say they're going to trade back. But I want the one that you want. And then after all that, we'll go back and say what we think that they're going to do. So, John, go ahead.
Okay. So, if they end up staying at 11, I think it's all going to depend on obviously who falls to them. But I think you're looking at either an offensive lineman. You're probably looking at Rashawn Slater. If Penei Sewell falls, he's also a guy that can get bumped in and play guard. He'd be a 330-pound mauler. Neither of them played last year, so they're both. I think
there's zero chance that Penei Sewell falls.
Yeah, it's unlikely.
If he does get by Cincinnati, though, if you look at the rest of the teams that are drafting there, they have needs that don't fit his particular skill set. So it's a lot of it depends on that number 5 pick with the Bengals.
So offensive lineman. If you're staying at 11, I think you need to pick value. So I don't love going edge in that spot. I don't think that you can go edge and say you got value unless you are able to trade back a little bit. If you could trade back to 15 to 20 in that range, I think then you can take a flyer on one of these defensive ends that have some question marks, maybe a Phillips. The guy, he's probably a top 5 pick if he doesn't have an injury history. He literally quit football from UCLA because of concussions, and I think he fractured his wrist.
He's the guy that jumps out at me as that every down end with freak athleticism.
So if the Giants have done their medical research and have cleared this guy and are not concerned about concussion issues in the future, give him the best concussion helmet that they provide for the NFL players and throw him in there because he is a stud and he can rush the passer and he can literally do everything. And if they can give him the medical blessing, I'd say that would be the one exception at 11 that I'd be comfortable with. But if not, I think you're looking at one of those wide receivers. So if you can't get that tackle and you're still not 100% comfortable with the medicals on Phillips, I really like taking another offensive weapon, taking Smith or taking Waddle in that spot.
Who's better, Smith or Waddle?
That's so hard because they both have some, all-pro comparisons.
That actually might be a question for the next 10 years. Those guys are that level where that could be a question for the next 10 years, and it could come down to who drafts them, what system they're put in, who the quarterback is, and if you flip-flop them with teams they go with, their careers could be a totally different path.
So they're both slot guys that can play on the outside, right? They have a lot of similar skill sets. Here's the difference, in my opinion. Smith has a little bit of additional height. Obviously, he's a Heisman Trophy winner. He has amazing hands, and he's really great in the open field. Now, Waddle is a 5'10", a little more compact. I think he's got 30 pounds on Devontae Smith. I think he's more of that, Tyreek Hill guy. He's slightly faster. He's definitely built a little thicker that could potentially hold up over the long term. And the guy's got heart, man. He came back from an ankle injury to play in that national championship game this last year because he didn't want his last game to be being taken off the field with an ankle injury. So really, I honestly don't know which one's going to be the better player. I've seen mocks where they're back and forth on which one of those guys goes first. But if one of them is available, if both of them are available, I think I prefer Waddle over Smith. But I've also heard that Gettleman is falling for Smith.
I think that you see all these mock drafts, and offensive linemen aren't sexy. They don't, nobody knows who these guys are. McShay and all these guys that are doing these mock drafts, they want the quarterbacks, they want wide receivers, they want those big name players that you know about.
Because that's what the casual fan wants to see.
That's what the casual fan wants to see. But when draft time comes around, you see it's the defensive ends, it's the offensive tackles that go earlier. I am hoping that, we go in that direction of, in a different direction. But I'm thinking that both of those guys are going to be still available. I think both receivers, I think they will fall down a little bit. really, because I think you made a good point. They're both kind of slot guys. They're not that number one huge deep threat Megatron type guy. They're super talented and everything like that, but I don't think they're necessarily a number one receiver. I think they're to be complement for what we have with Galladay. It could be perfect, but I think they're going to fall a little bit down into the teens when it comes into the draft. Eric, how about you?
If they stay at 11, I would prefer they go line because I don't think the edge there is the value at that pick. But I also differ on who I think the edge should be. I'm a fan of, and again, the background checks and the health things. I'm a Micah Parsons guy more than I am a Jalen Phillips guy at this point. But I don't think it's at 11. So if we're going with they're staying at 11, I do believe it comes down to offensive line and receiver. I also would prefer Darisaw from Virginia Tech over Slater and Sewell at this point. So my option would go Darisaw. And if we have to choose between the two Alabama receivers, I've been back and forth. I'm going back to Devontae Smith. I like the height. I think in an NFL locker room, he could put a little bit more muscle, a little bit more weight on. If you just watch the college football playoffs, I mean, that guy was insane.
It's one of the most dominant performances I've ever seen. And I've never seen anybody take over a game at that level and just completely. It was a different level of football.
And he showed it all. He showed he could catch screens and take it the distance. He showed toe work on the sidelines. He showed going over the middle. He showed being able to go deep. Like, literally, if you're looking for a receiver, he showed you everything. He's not just the guy who takes quick screens and goes. He's not just the guy that's a possession receiver on the sidelines. He showed it all. And I just think getting him into an NFL locker room with the nutrition and with the weight work, he could put on that extra 10 pounds.
See, but don't you think Alabama basically is an NFL program with nutritionists and weight rooms very equivalent to an NFL team?
They definitely have the facilities for that. They definitely do. But also as you age, sometimes your body mass grows and
Tell me about
it. I think the three of us sitting at this table.
I guarantee that if you're on that Alabama roster and you're a senior and you're a third string anything, pros they're still even looking at your, you know what I mean? They're looking at, because hey, you might have two All-Americans ahead of you that, they have your tapes. Do you know what I mean? That's how they have your practice tapes. They do whatever. Alabama is such a juggernaut program. It's almost not fair. They shouldn't allow them to get away with what they do. It's kind of insane. All right. So now I just want you to think, here we go. The Giants are on the clock. I wanted to say, make your prediction. What are they going to do, and who are they going to pick? This is our final point in the podcast. I want your last opinion on what happens. The Giants are on the clock. It is the 11th pick, or maybe it's earlier and they've traded up. So here we go. Eric, what do you got?
I believe they stay. I don't believe they trade back, because unless he for some reason goes outside of his system, outside of his beliefs. He doesn't trade back, and I don't know where the opportunity to really trade up if it's not number 8 with Carolina. I think a lot of the teams ahead of them, well, the Cowboys, they're only one spot ahead, but they would never trade with them. I don't know where they would be able to find that partner. Maybe Detroit. Detroit moving back 4 spots and picking up something, they might be open to that, because if they're looking at one of those receivers, they probably are thinking the same thing. If we're at 7, we have our option of Waddle and Smith. If we trade back 4 spots and the Giants really want it, we probably have our option of we're at least getting one of those guys. But I think they stay, and I actually think it's probably going to be Slater.
Slater, you're picking Slater. All right, John, what do you got?
Okay, so here's what I think is going to happen. And the reason that I think this is it's going to be one of two things. Kind of what we were talking about earlier. The offseason moves that they made, they addressed the wide receiver position. They addressed the defensive backfield position. They didn't address the offensive line, but I honestly think that their opportunity to improve the offensive line is going to be in the interior, where they can ignore it for the first round, and there's going to be some really solid interior offensive linemen available at their second pick. I think that Georgia connection that they seem to have, I think that they're going to end up going edge. I don't agree with it because I think it's too early to go edge there, but I go Aziz. Ojulari. A lot of drafts actually have him going early second round or late first round, but I just feel like it's one of those things. He's a well-rounded guy. I think he fits the system. He's a stand-up and an edge rusher. He's proven himself. He had a pretty high sack total last year. He's kind of got everything. I feel like he's maybe one of the lesser risks of an edge rusher out of the draft this year. And I just know that connection, especially, a guy like Crowder, in the locker room, he's pulling for the guy. He's voicing his opinion. And
are you saying they get him at 11?
I think that they're going to
pull the trigger on him at 11.
Yeah, I think that they're going to go edge, and I think that would be their guy.
Gettleman has been known to move up in drafts. He's done it multiple times. So is it possible, if he really is a late first, early second, is it possible they do something at 11 and then bump themselves back up into that late first where they might be able to pull?
Yeah, so can you trade your second and third pick to get back to the back end of the first round? Probably.
I know you want him to trade up and get Kyle Pitts. It's not happening, dude. Just stop, okay?
Dreams.
Yeah, we're stuck with Ingram. We're not going to improve on that. We got Kyle Rudolph to try to, maybe he's the sticky hands whisperer or something like that, and he can teach this guy to catch.
I'm okay if we don't get him as long as he doesn't go to Dallas.
I don't know if he's making it to Dallas.
Well, no, I don't think he's making.
I don't think he is either. But
I think he's going to go to Atlanta. To be honest, number 4 to Atlanta.
Again, that's a team. If he's on that team, you might want to go put money on their Super Bowl odds prior to the draft because the value of that would actually.
And then they go quarterback like a Trey Lance to sit behind Matt Ryan for a year, and the odds go the other way. But that's what I see. If they don't go edge at 11 and basically overpay, I don't think that's what you should do in that position. I think that the other option is that they do go wide receiver. I think he fell in love with Devontae Smith. But that's a move where it's like, hey, you would literally address that in the offseason. Now you're making that your number 11 overall pick. I don't love it. I love the player. I don't know if it's a first round 11th overall need.
If they're both available, and I don't know if that's even possible at 11, it actually might go to show what Saban actually thinks of them because they're calling Alabama and he's giving his opinion. So if they're both there and one is drafted by the Giants, it would go to show who Saban probably had as his number 1.
They talked a little bit about a lot of just rumors going around the NFL, possibly Dallas trading back, the Patriots possibly trading up a little bit to try to get a Mac Jones or somebody in that position, if it's available. Dallas trading back really just to screw the Giants but one position that somebody might trade up for is that Rashawn Slater. For a lineman. So that's something I could see somebody trading up to get. I don't think he's going to be around at 10. Again, I think the linemen are going to do better than projected, and I think the wide receivers are going to do worse. Gettleman's saying that it's a myth that he trade back. I think that shows 100% that he's not going to trade back. I don't know why he even made that statement. I would love to see him trade back. I'm afraid that if he trades back, he won't take the best available. I think he'll take like a Kwity Paye at 16 or something like that. That's a guy that could possibly be around in the second round when we get to him. I don't know if it'll last that long, but I would love to see somebody like that in the second round if we traded up a little bit to get somebody like him. That's a guy with elite speed, sky-high ceiling. That's somebody I would love them to potentially get in the second round. We need that edge really bad. There's nobody there in that 11 pick that deserves to be drafted that high.
Totally agree.
Yes. So I'm thinking there's not going to be the lineman that we want. I think it's going to be a wide receiver, and I'm thinking it's going to be Jalen Waddle. I think Devontae Smith was the sexy pick early, coming out of the national championship and everything.
DG loves sexy though.
I know, but I don't think he'll be. I think he'll be gone too. I think Waddle's the guy, and everything that I'm reading and everything I'm seeing is that he's that Tyreek Hill type of player, and to go with Galladay, to go with Slayton, to go with that. We're gonna give him all the weapons in the world. There's gonna be no excuses, and we just have to depend on our line coach to coach these guys up and give them time to get the ball out. So
one thing that came out today regarding Carolina, because once Carolina traded for Darnold, everybody assumed, okay, they're off the board for quarterback. They're gonna move on. It came out today. Their GM said we're not signing him to the 5th-year extension until after the draft. And that kind of shook people up, thinking now, how does that really affect that 8th spot? What are they going to do? What could they possibly do? So that's something that could really affect the Giants draft. If a lot of people thought they were going one way because they got Darnold and they were going to go, if he's making that comment, that's sending a message, I think, to the rest of the NFL. Either we're open for business or we're still looking at a quarterback, and it's going to affect how you guys draft.
All right, so this is our final thought. Where I'm just going to ask you, we're going to just say the guys that we wanted again, just to repeat them, so it's on record. I think that he's going to pick Jalen Waddle, wide receiver. John?
I'm down to the wide receiver or the edge. What are they going to do if they stay at I'm going to go Azeez
Ojulari, okay, from Georgia.
So this is who we think they're taking, not
This
who
is
we
it.
want.
This is your final pick. You're on the clock.
So I said something earlier I might want to change now, and it's all about who's there. If Smith is there, I don't think they can pass it up. If he's not, it's going to be Slater. Well, I would say it'd be Slater.
This is part of the projection, you jackass. You have to say who's going to be there and whatever. You can't hedge your bet.
I'm gonna go Slater.
Slater. Okay.
Although I would prefer Darrisaw.
I agree. I would prefer Slater, but I think he's going to be gone. So, all right, guys, that's all we got for you. Our next podcast is going to be recapping the draft. And
God, I hope I'm not pulling my hair out.
I don't have that much to pull out anymore after last season. So, yeah, we're going to be doing that. And then we're going to start doing some trivia podcasts where we get some guests in. And we're going to have some little trivia games that we want you, our listeners, to be a part of as well. So we'll get more on that in some future podcasts. So thank you very much. And we will see you next week.
Go Big Blue Nation.
Yo.